Hi everyone, my name is Kristi. I chose to do my project on cerebral palsy. I have quite a bit of experience working with children on the autism spectrum as well as children with emotional disturbance, but I really don't have any experience working with children that have orthopedic impairments. So I thought that cerebral palsy would be a great topic for me to pick to learn more about. I have learned a lot actually from researching this project, and I hope that you all can learn a little something from it as well. So, cerebral palsy is a group of disorders that affect a person's ability to move and maintain balance and posture, as stated in this first definition. The second definition is taken out of our book. I tried to find an easier way to define cerebral palsy. And for me, I have written down here, it's a disorder that affects muscle tone, movement, and motor skills. And it's usually caused by brain damage that happens before or during birth or during the first 3 to 5 years of a child's life. Um, Cerebral palsy is not genetic and it is usually diagnosed around 18 months, but as I just said, it can be diagnosed later on in a child's life. Cerebral palsy affects people in different ways due to the part of the brain that was injured. It also affects different parts of the body. So some people with cerebral palsy can use their arms. Some people don't have use of their arms and legs. Some people don't have use of their legs. So each case of cerebral palsy is a little bit different. So some of the signs of cerebral palsy are if you were to go to pick a baby up and it felt floppy, that's a sign. Another sign is if a baby can't hold its own head up. So we all know that newborns obviously can't support their own head, but if a child that is old enough to hold their own head up doesn't, that's another sign. Stiff muscles are a sign, as well as unusual postures. There are 4 different types of cerebral palsy. Spastic is probably the most common. Out of everything that I read, it states that 80% of people with cerebral palsy have spastic cerebral palsy. So this basically means that it's hard for them to turn their muscles on and off. The next type is dyskinetic. And from what I gathered, 6% of people with cerebral palsy have dyskinesia. This is characterized by involuntary movements. Next is ataxic or ataxia, which basically means shaky movements, and ataxia affects balance and movement. And from what I read, about 5% of people have ataxia. Lastly, there are some people that have mixed types of cerebral palsy, so they might have spastic cerebral palsy as well as ataxia or dyskinesia. So it really kind of depends, like I said before, on the individual case. One thing that's really important to remember about the 4 types of cerebral palsy is that knowing the type helps students receive the supports that they need. So, for example, an occupational therapist or a physical therapist would probably like to know the type so that they could um, provide the correct support and treatment to help the student with their motor skills and muscle development. So according to Muser, cerebral palsy falls under an orthopedic impairment. So as you can see here, an orthopedic impairment means a severe orthopedic impairment that adversely affects a child's educational performance. One thing that I forgot to mention before is that just because someone might have cerebral palsy, it does not mean that they are intellectually disabled. From what I read, a lot of people assume that because someone has cerebral palsy that they are intellectually disabled, and that is certainly not the case. Later on, there's a list of videos linked in my slideshow, and one of the videos is about a teenage girl who has cerebral palsy, and she is very clear that she does not have an intellectual disability, and her mom states that sometimes people think that she does because of the way she looks, which is really too bad. That being said, it is possible for a child or an individual with cerebral palsy to have an intellectual disability or developmental disability. From what I read, it seems like about 30 to 60% of individuals with cerebral palsy do have either intellectual disability or a developmental disability, but that's not the case for everyone. So that is really important to remember. So here are a list of some different classroom and educational implications. So I have had a teeny tiny bit of experience with a child with cerebral palsy. I know at the beginning of my presentation, I said I didn't really, but there is a child at one of the schools that I've worked at that had cerebral palsy, and she was in a mainstream classroom 100% of the time with a one-on-one aide. I would just pass the student in the hallway, and that was pretty much it. I really didn't get to know the student at all or have a chance to. And I know that having a one-on-one aide for that student was really, really important. So that is an implication for the classroom. Health and safety plans are also really important. Some students with cerebral palsy need help toileting and just help with activities of daily living. So having a health and safety plan is really important. A lot of students with cerebral palsy also have augmentative communication devices, which are also known as talkers. So learning how to use those is also very important, as well as adapting the environment for different pieces of equipment that the student might use. And I'll talk about all of this later. This all kind of blends and meshes together with accommodations and modifications and teaching strategies. So I'll talk about this more in the next few slides. So some teaching strategies for students with cerebral palsy. Collaborative teaching is very important. So not every student that has CP is going to be in a special education classroom, but that is common. It is also common for students with CP to receive occupational therapy, physical therapy, and or speech therapy. So as a teacher, collaborating with all three of those supports, sometimes four supports if there's a gen ed teacher involved or a special education teacher, depending, is really important. Having regular check-ins with these people, because working with an occupational therapist and physical therapist is really important for the student, and as a teacher, knowing what the student is working on in OT and PT and incorporating that in the classroom is really important. Sometimes students with cerebral palsy have slower response times to questions. So being patient and letting the student process the information that you've given them, especially if the student has an intellectual or developmental disability. So keeping that in mind and just being patient and giving time to respond. That goes along with being clear and brief with instructions. I think that's important really at the elementary level anyway, regardless of the disability. I think in a special education classroom, it's important to be patient, to give As far as accommodations and modifications, they, as I said before, kind of blend together in my eyes. I can kind of make more sense of it if I blend it together. So allowing written responses versus spoken responses, or vice versa. So some students with cerebral palsy may feel more comfortable typing their responses on a talker or a computer. Some might feel more comfortable speaking. So allowing the student to give responses to answers in the way that is more comfortable for them. I think this probably goes without saying, but it's important to note, arranging the classroom to enhance movement and mobility for the student with cerebral palsy. It's not unusual for students with cerebral palsy to be in a wheelchair or to have a walker. So making sure the classroom is set up so that student can get around. There's already going to be, not really a stigma, but the student is already going to feel like they kind of stick out. So you don't want them bumping into things or anything like that. Making sure they can get around. That goes along with providing adequate storage space for a student's equipment and allowing students to use their assistive technology, which, I mean, I can't imagine not letting a student do that. Some more accommodations and modifications are listed here. One thing that's really important is modifying physical education activities. Not every student can do the PE activities for that day. So letting a student with cerebral palsy modify what they can do. Limiting the amount of homework, allowing extra time for testing or answers in class, and letting the students with cerebral palsy, or sometimes any student really, picking what seating is most comfortable for them if it's appropriate. But definitely children with cerebral palsy, sometimes they may be more comfortable taking a break and sitting on the floor. It's important for students with cerebral palsy to be moved in different positions throughout the day to help relieve tension and stiffness in their muscles. So, kind of in closing, these three videos are very interesting and powerful. I've watched all three of them, and I would really strongly recommend all of you to watch all three. A few of them are kind of long, especially the middle one, but the third one is an um, a woman who has cerebral palsy who's also a comedian, and her TED Talk is amazing. I would really, really recommend it. These three videos taught me a lot more about cerebral palsy than I could have learned by just reading information. So lastly, for the activity, the interactive activity, I want you guys to watch at least one of the videos on the previous slide. Like I said, all three of them are excellent and worth the watch. I think one of them is 25 minutes, one of them is 15 minutes, but they are so worth it. I promise you, it's worth it. So please watch one or more of the videos listed in the last slide. And after watching the video, I would really like you to leave a comment in the comments section stating what you learned from the video or what the video might have done or changed your view on cerebral palsy. I know that watching videos definitely helps me learn more than reading. So I'm really interested to hear what you guys have to say about these videos. And please reflect on your personal experience. Like I said, I have a teeny tiny bit of experience with cerebral palsy, nothing that I would give people advice on or anything like that. But these videos definitely opened up my eyes and educated me. So please leave your personal reflections in the comments below and let me know what you learned from these videos and from the presentation. So thank you guys for listening. I hope that I didn't ramble too much, and I'm excited to hear and see everyone else's projects. Thank you.